Sign the papers, Elena. I'm leaving you for Scarlett. I've been diagnosed with ALS. I'm dying, and I refuse to spend my remaining time looking at a woman I no longer love. The words hit the air like a spray of acid, burning through the silence of our $4.5 million Manhattan penthouse. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the sunset over the Hudson River casting a bloody hue across the room. Across from me sat Julian Vance, the man I had built a life with for 8 years. His hands were trembling, a telltale sign of the motor neuron decay, but his eyes were as cold as a winter grave. Clinging to his arm like a parasitic vine was Scarlett Reed, a 24-year-old intern whose only contribution to Julian's law firm was the affair they had been conducting behind my back. "You're dying?" I asked, my voice dangerously steady. As a senior cardiovascular surgeon, I had delivered death sentences to families for years. I didn't break. I analyzed. "And your grand solution is to discard your wife for a girl who was in middle school when we got married? This isn't a tragedy, Julian. It's a cliché." "Don't you dare talk about her like that," Julian snapped, his voice cracking. He tried to reach for his scotch, but his fingers fumbled. Scarlett quickly helped him, her eyes darting to me with a mixture of pity and triumph. "Scarlett makes me feel live." "You? You just look at me like I'm a patient on your operating table. I've already drafted the settlement. You keep the penthouse, the Hamptons estate, and the $1.2 million in our joint savings. I'm walking away with nothing but my clothes and my peace of mind." I took a step toward them, my heels clicking against the hardwood like a death march. Scarlett flinched, retreating into the shadow of Julian's shoulder. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated fury, not just because of the betrayal, but because of the insulting generosity he was using to mask his guilt. "You think giving me everything makes you a martyr?" I whispered, leaning over the table. "You're a coward. You're terrified of the end, so you've picked a girl too young to understand the weight of a funeral. You didn't come to me because you knew I'd be the one to actually take care of you, and you can't stand the thought of being weak in front of me." "It doesn't matter what you think," Julian said, standing up with a shaky effort. "The papers are there. 60 days, Elena. In 60 days, the divorce is final. We're moving into Scarlett's place tonight." As the door clicked shut behind them, the silence in the penthouse became deafening. I didn't cry. Crying was for victims, and I had spent too many years cutting out the rot in people's hearts to let my own break. I walked into our master closet, a cathedral of vanity filled with $3,000 Brioni suits and handmade Italian shoes that I had paid for while Julian was still a struggling junior associate. I grabbed my surgical scissors from my medical bag. Snip. The charcoal wool of his favorite blazer shredded. Snip. The silk ties fell to the floor like severed veins. I didn't stop until his entire wardrobe was a pile of useless rags. If he wanted to walk away with nothing, I was going to ensure he started from zero. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother-in-law, Lydia Montgomery. "Elena, dear, Julian told us everything. We are so disappointed in your coldness. He is sick. He needs a wife, not a critic. Be the bigger person." I let out a jagged laugh and typed back. "He's leaving me for his intern, Lydia. If you want a bigger person, ask Scarlett. And tell Julian the $1.2 million is being frozen for an audit. Welcome to the real world." I stared out at the New York skyline. The 60-day countdown had begun. Julian wanted a clean break? I was going to give him a surgical amputation. The first morning of my new life tasted like stale coffee and cold revenge. I woke up at 5 a.m., not because I had a surgery scheduled, but because the silence in the penthouse was screaming. I didn't go to the hospital. Instead, I sat at the mahogany desk in the library. the divorce papers Julian had so graciously provided lying open before me. $1.2 million. To most, it was a fortune. To a man like Julian Vance, who cleared twice that in annual bonuses at his firm, it was hush money. It was the price he was willing to pay to walk into his sunset with Scarlett without a guilty conscience. I opened my laptop and began the extraction. As a surgeon, I knew that to save the body, you had to find the source of the infection. In this case, the infection was Julian's ego. He thought he was the smartest man in any room, but he had forgotten one thing. I was the one who managed our private investments while he was busy mentoring his intern at late-night steakhouse dinners. My phone chimed. A notification from our shared security system. Someone was at the front door. I walked to the foyer and checked the camera. It wasn't Julian. It was his father, Arthur Montgomery, looking every bit the disgraced patriarch in a stiff trench coat. I opened the door just wide enough to let the cold hallway air in. "Elena," he began, his voice booming with the unearned authority of old money. "Lydia told me about your text. It was incredibly distasteful. Julian is facing a terminal illness, and you're threatening his financial stability? That's not the woman we welcomed into this family." "The woman you welcomed into this family paid off your son's law school debt, Arthur," I said, leaning against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "And that woman died the moment your son walked out of here with a girl who's younger than my medical degree. If you want to talk about distasteful, let's talk about the fact that Julian has been using our joint account to pay for Scarlett's apartment in Chelsea for the last 6 months." Arthur's face paled. That's impossible. Julian is a man of integrity." "Julian is a man of many things, but integrity isn't on the list anymore. He's sick, Arthur. That's a tragedy. But being sick doesn't give him a license to be a bastard. If he wants my support, he can find it in the divorce court." "You'll lose," Arthur hissed, his mask slipping. "He's the best litigator in the city. He'll bury you." "He has ALS, Arthur. His hands are already shaking. How long before he can't hold a pen, let alone a jury? Tell him if he tries to fight me, I won't just take the $1.2 million. I'll take his reputation. I'll make sure every partner at his firm knows he was embezzling time and resources for a mistress." I slammed the door before he could respond. My heart was racing, but not with fear. It was the adrenaline of the hunt. I went back to the laptop. I had found what I was looking for. A hidden brokerage account Julian had opened in the Cayman Islands 3 years ago. It held $800,000, money he had never disclosed in his clean break settlement. "Checkmate, Julian?" I whispered. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I answered, expecting a telemarketer or a bill collector. "Elena?" It was Julian. His voice sounded thin, strained. In the background, I could hear the muffled sounds of a busy New York street and a woman, Scarlett, complaining about the price of a taxi. "What do you want, Julian? I'm busy shredding your ties." I left my medication in the bathroom cabinet. The Riluzole. I need it. Scarlett, she doesn't know where to get the prescription refilled yet." "Then she should learn," I said, my grip tightening on the phone. "You wanted her to take care of you, didn't you? You wanted to feel alive with her? Well, part of being alive is managing your own survival. Don't call me for your pills. Call your new life." "Elena, please. I'm having trouble swallowing. It's starting faster than the doctor said." For a second, the doctor and me flinched. I knew the progression of ALS. I knew the horror of a body becoming a cage while the mind stayed sharp. But then I looked at the shredded suits on the floor, and the $800,000 secret on my screen. You have 60 days, Julian. Spend them however you want, but don't spend them talking to me. Goodbye. I hung up and felt a cold, sharp stone settle in my chest. I wasn't just his wife anymore. I was his consequence. The penthouse felt like a tomb, but I was the one who held the keys to the mausoleum. By 9 a.m. the next morning, a crew of professional movers arrived. I didn't just want Julian out of my life. I wanted every ghost of him scrubbed from these walls. Everything goes, I told the foreman, gesturing to the custom-made Italian sofa, the $20,000 area rugs, and the dining table where we had celebrated his promotions. If it has a memory attached to it, sell it or burn it. I don't care which. As they began hauling out the physical remnants of my marriage, I sat on the kitchen counter, my laptop open. I had already made the call to our bank. Since Julian had generously left me the $1.2 million in the joint account, I exercised my legal right as a co-owner to move it. All of it? I transferred the funds into a private account he couldn't touch, then placed a freeze on our credit cards. If Julian wanted to play house in a tiny studio with his intern, he was going to do it on an intern's budget. My phone rang. It was Julian again. This time, I answered. I wanted to hear the panic in his voice. "Elena, what the hell did you do?" he screamed, followed by a fit of heavy coughing. "I just tried to pay for the movers at the new place, and my card was declined. I have no access to the joint savings. That's my money, too." Actually, Julian, per the settlement you drafted and signed, you walked away with nothing but your clothes and your dignity. I quoted back to him, my voice dripping with icy satisfaction. I simply took you at your word. You wanted to be a martyr, remember? Martyrs don't need Amex Gold cards. "You can't do this. I have medical expenses. Scarlett and you are now living the simple life you craved," I interrupted. "And about those clothes you mentioned? They're currently in a dumpster behind the building." "I'd hurry if I were you. The garbage truck comes at noon." You monster," he wheezed. I could hear the tremor in his breath, the weakness of his diaphragm. "I'm sick, Elena. How can you be so heartless?" "I'm not heartless, Julian. I'm a surgeon. I'm just removing the necrotic tissue. You were the one who told me I looked at you like a patient." "Well, consider yourself discharged. Go ask your life-giving mistress for a loan." I hung up and felt a surge of adrenaline. It was better than any shot of espresso. An hour later, the doorbell rang. I expected the movers, but instead, I found Scarlett Reed standing in the hallway. She looked exhausted. The polished it-girl facade she wore at the office had crumbled. Her hair was messy, and her cheap mascara was smudged. "Where is he?" she demanded, trying to push past me. I blocked the doorway, looming over her. I was 5 inches taller and 100 times more formidable. "You're in the wrong zip code, Scarlett. Julian is in your studio, remember? The one you can no longer afford because I just contacted the firm's HR about your unprofessional conduct with a senior partner." Her eyes widened in terror. "You did what? You'll get us both fired." "No, just you," I smiled. "Julian is a partner. He'll get a quiet medical retirement. But you're a liability. No law firm in Manhattan will touch you after this." "You wanted him, Scarlett? Now you have him. All of him. The tremors, the choking, the medical bills, and the $0 bank balance. Congratulations, you won the prize." "You're insane," she whispered, her lip trembling. "He's dying. Don't you care?" I cared for 8 years. I cared while I worked 30-hour shifts to put him through school. I cared when I cooked his meals and supported his ego. My care quota for Julian Vance has officially expired. I leaned in closer, my voice a cold whisper. Now get off my doorstep before I call security and have you dragged out of here for trespassing. You have a sick man to go feed. Better get to it. I slammed the door and locked all 3 bolts. For the first time in years, the penthouse felt light. It was empty, stripped of furniture and stripped of lies. I walked to the window and watched a taxi pull away from the curb below. I wasn't just a jilted wife. I was the architect of my own liberation. And Julian? He was about to find out exactly how much his freedom really cost. The drive to the Hamptons was usually a peaceful escape, a 2-hour blur of green trees leading to our $3 million shingle-style estate. But today, the hum of my Porsche felt like a war drum. I wasn't going there to relax. I was going to reclaim what was mine before the Montgomery vultures could pick it clean. I arrived at noon. Parked in the circular driveway was Arthur's silver Mercedes. I stepped out, adjusted my sunglasses, and felt the salt air hit my face. I didn't knock. I had paid the mortgage on this house for 3 years. I didn't need permission to enter. Inside, the living room smelled of expensive gin and desperation. Arthur and Lydia were huddled by the fireplace, speaking in hushed tones with a man I recognized as Julian's estate lawyer, Mr. Henderson. "Elena?" Lydia gasped, dropping her glass. "What on earth are you doing here? This is a family matter." "Exactly, Lydia. And since I'm still legally Julian's wife for the next 58 days, I am the family," I said, tossing my keys onto the side table with a loud thud. "Mr. Henderson, I hope you haven't started drafting any transfer deeds, because if you have, you've wasted your billable hours." "Now see here, Elena," Arthur blustered, stepping forward. "Julian needs the equity from this house for his treatment. The Swiss clinic won't accept anger as a form of payment. He needs the liquid capital from the sale of this estate." "Then he should have stayed in the marriage that provided the health insurance," I countered. I walked over to the bar and poured myself a glass of sparkling water, ignoring their glares. "I've checked the title. This house is in both our names with a right of survivorship. I am not signing a sale agreement. In fact, I'm changing the locks this afternoon." "You wouldn't!" Lydia hissed, her face contorting. "Our son is wasting away. He's staying in a hovel in Queens because you stole his savings. That girl Scarlett called me crying. They don't even have a proper bed." "Then let him sleep on his pride, Lydia. He told me it was the only thing he was taking with him." I turned to the lawyer. "Mr. Henderson, if you facilitate any attempt by Julian to borrow against this property, I will sue you for malpractice and Julian for fraud. I have documentation of the $800,000 he hid in the Caymans. Would you like to see the bank statements, or should I save them for the IRS?" The room went deathly silent. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and avoided Arthur's gaze. "Is this true, Arthur? There are undisclosed assets?" Arthur looked like he was having a stroke. It was for his future, to protect him in case your career stalled, Elena." "My career? Stalled?" I laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. "I'm the head of cardiothoracic surgery at NYU Langone. My career is the only reason this family isn't living in a suburban duplex. You people have lived off my labor and my patience for a decade. That ends today." I walked toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Lydia? Tell Julian that I found the receipt for the $50,000 diamond necklace he bought Scarlett last month. Since it was purchased with marital funds, I've reported it as a fraudulent transfer. The jeweler is expecting a return, or a police report will be filed. Choice is hers." "You are a monster!" Lydia shrieked. "You're a cold-blooded bitch!" "No," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "I'm a surgeon. When I see a malignant tumor, I cut it out. Julian was the cancer. You two are just the inflammation. I'm done with all of you. I walked out into the bright sunshine, the sound of Lydia's sobbing fading behind me. I felt a strange, cold clarity. I wasn't just winning. I was erasing them. As I pulled out of the driveway, my phone buzzed. It was an email from a private investigator I'd hired. Subject: Scarlet Reed, background check. I opened it and scrolled. A slow, predatory smile spread across my face. Well, Scarlet, I whispered. It seems you have a few secrets of your own. Let's see how much Julian loves you when he finds out who he's really dying for. The smell of the Queen's apartment was the first thing that hit me, a mix of damp drywall and cheap takeout. It was a far cry from the lavender-scented hallways of our penthouse. I stood in the narrow corridor, clutching a folder of documents that felt like a loaded gun. I hadn't come to reconcile. I had come to witness the rot. The door opened after my third knock. Scarlet stood there, looking ravaged. The youthful glow Julian had traded his life for had been replaced by a gray, hollow exhaustion. She was wearing an oversized hoodie that I recognized. It was Julian's. "What do you want, Elena?" she whispered, not even trying to block the door this time. She didn't have the energy. "Haven't you taken enough?" "I haven't even started," I said, pushing past her into the cramped living space. In the corner, Julian sat in a second-hand recliner. The change in him over just 2 weeks was staggering. His frame seemed to have shrunk, his skin clinging to his cheekbones like wet parchment. His right hand lay limp in his lap, a useless weight of flesh and bone. When he saw me, his eyes flared with a brief spark of the old Julian, arrogant and defiant, but it was quickly extinguished by a violent fit of coughing. "Elena!" he managed to wheeze, his voice sounding like sandpaper on wood. "Come to gloat?" "I came to deliver a reality check," I said, tossing the private investigator's report onto his lap. "You told me Scarlet made you feel alive. I thought you should know exactly what kind of life she's been leading." Julian looked down at the papers. Scarlet froze, her face turning a sickly shade of white. "It's all in there," I continued, my voice clinical. "Scarlet isn't just an intern, Julian. She's a professional companion for high-stakes gamblers. She has 3 aliases and a standing debt of $200,000 to a bookie in Atlantic City. Why do you think she targeted a star litigator with a terminal diagnosis? She didn't want your heart, Julian. She wanted your life insurance." Julian's eyes moved slowly to Scarlet. Is this true?"
"Julian, no! She's lying! She's just trying to tear us apart because she's bitter!"
Scarlet lunged for the papers, but I caught her wrist. My grip was like iron. "I'm a doctor, Scarlet. I deal in facts," I hissed. "The debt collectors have already been calling the firm. That's why you were really fired. You weren't a breath of fresh air for my husband. You were a life raft for your own sinking ship." I let go of her, and she stumbled back, sobbing. I turned my attention back to Julian. I felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a cold, distant recognition of a wasted life. "You traded 8 years of loyalty for a con artist, Julian. You gave up your dignity, your home, and your care for a woman who is currently calculating how much she can get for your watch when you stop breathing." Julian's breath hitched. He tried to speak, but the muscles in his throat betrayed him. He looked at his trembling left hand, then at the squalor of the apartment. For the first time, I saw it in his eyes. The terrifying realization that he had made a catastrophic, irreversible mistake. "Elena, please." He choked out. A single tear tracked through the dust on his cheek. I didn't know." "You didn't want to know?" I corrected him. "You wanted to feel young. You wanted to pretend that dying was a grand adventure you could have with a pretty girl. But dying is ugly. It's expensive. And it's lonely when the person next to you is only waiting for the check to clear." I turned to leave, but stopped at the door. I looked at Scarlett, who was curled on the floor, weeping. "By the way, Julian," I said, my hand on the knob, "I checked the life insurance policy. Since the divorce isn't final for another 45 days, I am still the sole beneficiary. And I've already instructed my lawyers that if any unusual changes are made to the policy while you are under medical duress, we will litigate until Scarlett is a grandmother." "You can't leave me like this," Julian whispered, his voice a ghost. "You left yourself like this," I replied. "I'm just the one who turned out the lights." I walked out into the cold Queen's night, the sound of the subway rumbling overhead. My heart should have felt heavy, but it felt like a diamond, hard, brilliant, and unbreakable. The decay was complete. Now, it was time for the reconstruction. Money is the ultimate truth serum. In Manhattan, you can camouflage a lot of things: affairs, addictions, even a dying body. But you cannot hide the sudden absence of a credit limit. I was in my office at the hospital, scrubbing in for a late afternoon bypass, when my assistant buzzed the intercom. "Dr. Vance, I have a Mr. Sterling from Tiffany & Company. On line 1, he says it's an emergency regarding a flagged transaction on your marital account." I paused, a cold, sharp smile spreading across my face. "Put him through." "Mrs. Vance?" The man's voice was strained, the polished composure of a luxury jeweler cracking at the edges. "We have a Miss Scarlett Reed here. She is attempting to return a 6-carat yellow diamond necklace for a cash refund of $120,000. She's claiming power of attorney for your husband, but the account is flagged for a legal freeze." "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice as smooth as a scalpel, "that necklace was purchased with marital funds during a contested divorce. If you issue a cent to that woman, my legal team will sue your flagship store for conversion before the sun sets. Secure the jewelry. If she refuses to leave, call the NYPD and tell them a thief is harassing your staff." I hung up. $120,000. That was the price of Julian's rebirth. While he was struggling to swallow his own saliva in a Queen's walk-up, Scarlett was trying to liquidate his guilt into a getaway fund. I decided it was time to witness the final audit of Julian's dignity. I drove to the prestigious law firm of Vance and Montgomery. The atmosphere inside had shifted from hushed reverence to a frantic, sinking chill. I walked straight into Julian's corner office. It was being stripped. Arthur Montgomery stood by the window, looking 10 years older, clutching a cardboard box. "Elena," he spat, his voice trembling, "I hope you're satisfied. The partners have asked Julian to take a permanent medical leave. His reputation is in tatters and he's in the hospital. Pneumonia. A complication of the ALS." "I didn't do this to him, Arthur. He chose a path that led away from a surgeon and toward a grifter," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Where is he? Bellevue?" "Yes, and that girl, she didn't even ride in the ambulance. She said she had an urgent appointment midtown." The irony was so sharp, it almost drew blood. Julian had traded a world-class doctor for a girl who wouldn't even hold his hand in a siren-blaring van because she was too busy trying to pawn his parting gifts. I drove to Bellevue. It wasn't the private, silk-sheeted wing of NYU where I practiced. It was the public ward, loud, smelling of industrial bleach and despair. I found Julian in a cramped room, separated from a snoring stranger by a thin yellow curtain. He looked like a hollowed-out version of the man I once loved. An oxygen mask was strapped to his face, fogging with every ragged, desperate breath.
When he heard the click of my heels, the sound he used to claim was the rhythm of his heart, his eyes fluttered open. He reached out with his left hand, the only part of him that still obeyed his will, and gripped my sleeve. Elena, he rasped. She's gone, Julian, I said, standing over him like a statue of retribution. I didn't reach back. I didn't offer a drop of comfort. She tried to return the necklace today. When the money didn't come through, she didn't come here. My investigator says she's already at JFK boarding a flight to Las Vegas. A harsh, wet sob escaped his throat. He looked around the dismal room, at the peeling paint and the flickering lights. This was the freedom he had bragged about. I was wrong, he whispered, tears tracking through the dust on his skin. Yes, you were, I agreed. You were wrong about her. You were wrong about me. And you were wrong about how much it costs to die. That necklace? It's back in my vault. The $1.
$2 million? It's funding my move to Boston. I've accepted the chief of surgery position at MGEH. Julian's eyes widened with terror. Don't leave. I left a long time ago, Julian. You just didn't notice because you were too busy looking at Scarlett. I leaned down, my face inches from his. I'll cover your bills until the divorce is final. After that, you are your father's problem. Goodbye, Julian. I turned and walked away. Every step felt lighter. Behind me, the heart monitor began to beep in a frantic, rhythmic plea for a mercy I no longer possessed. 2 weeks before the divorce was to be finalized, the past came crashing into my present in the most sterile environment possible. The hospital. I was finishing a grueling 14-hour shift when the red phone in the ER paged me. Dr. Vance, we have a critical respiratory failure coming in. Male, 32, history of ALS. He's crashing. My heart didn't skip a beat. It turned into a block of ice. I knew exactly who was behind those doors. When the paramedics wheeled him in, Julian looked less like a man and more like a skeletal remains draped in hospital linens. He was blue, cyanotic, struggling for every atom of oxygen. Behind him, Arthur and Lydia Montgomery stumbled in, looking disheveled and frantic. They hadn't been able to afford the private nursing Julian needed after I froze the auxiliary accounts, and it showed. "Elena, thank God!" Lydia screamed, grabbing my white coat with claws that used to be manicured. "Save him! You have to save him!" I peeled her hand off my sleeve with clinical precision. "I am the attending surgeon on call, Lydia. I will do my job. But you need to step behind the red line. Now." I stepped into the trauma bay. My residents were hovering, waiting for my lead. I looked down at Julian. His eyes were wide, rolling in terror, searching for mine. He was drowning in his own body. The ALS had weakened his diaphragm so much that he could no longer clear the fluid from his lungs. "Dr. Vance, should we intubate?" my resident asked, his hand poised over the laryngoscope. I looked at Julian's chart, the one I had updated myself. He has a DNI do not intubate order on file from his initial diagnosis, I said, my voice echoing in the small room. He wanted a clean break from life, remember? He signed the papers himself when he thought he was going to be traveling the world with Scarlett. Julian's hand caught my wrist, It was a weak, fluttering touch like a dying bird.
His lips moved, forming a silent, desperate plea. Please. The room went silent. My staff looked at me, then at the dying man. This was the moment of ultimate power. I could ignore the old paperwork. I could save him, tying him to a ventilator for a few more months of agony just to prove I could, or I could let him go.
Elena, please, Arthur yelled from the hallway. Forget the papers, he's our son.
I looked Julian dead in the eye. I didn't see the man who had cheated on me. I didn't see the man who had tried to leave me with nothing.
I saw a patient who had made a choice when he was arrogant and was now paying for it while he was terrified. Check the timestamp on the DNI, I commanded. It was notarized 60 days ago. It stands. I leaned over Julian, my face inches from his. The smell of death was already on him. This is what you signed up for, Julian. You wanted to live fast and leave me behind. You didn't want the burden of my medical interventions. I'm simply honoring your wishes. Wait! A voice shrieked. I turned. Scarlett Reed stood at the entrance of the ER. She looked like a ghost of the girl she used to be. Her expensive clothes were wrinkled and her eyes were bloodshot. She had come back, not for Julian, but because she had nowhere else to go. He has a new will, she screamed, waving a crumpled piece of paper. He signed everything to me last night. You have to keep him alive until it's notarized.
The tension in the room snapped. Julian's monitor began a long, flat tone. I looked at the monitor, then at Scarlett, whose only concern was a signature on a page. Then I looked at Julian. His eyes were still fixed on mine, but the light was fading. In his last moment, he didn't look at his parents or his mistress. He looked at the woman he had betrayed, realizing she was the only one who had ever truly held his life in her hands. Time of death, 3:42 a.m., I said clearly. I turned my back on the chaos, Lydia's wailing, Arthur's cursing, and Scarlett's frantic demands. I walked to the sink, turned on the water, and began to scrub. Dr. Vance? My resident whispered, sounding shaken. Are you okay? I dried my hands, the paper towel crisp against my skin. I'm fine. Prepare the paperwork for the morgue, and tell the woman at the door that the will she's holding isn't worth the paper it's printed on. The divorce decree was finalized by a judge yesterday afternoon. I am the legal widow. She is nothing. I walked out of the ER, my head held high, leaving the ghosts behind in the fluorescent light. The aftermath of a death is often noisier than the passing itself. Julian was gone, but the stench of his choices lingered like a thick smog over Manhattan. 2 days after the ER incident, I found myself back at the penthouse. It was empty of furniture, but full of ghosts. I was standing in the kitchen, sipping a glass of wine in the dark, when my phone vibrated. A voicemail from an unknown number. I pressed play. Elena, it's me. Julian's voice, recorded 3 days before he died. He sounded drunk, his speech slurred by the muscle weakness in his tongue. I'm at the apartment in Queens. She's not here. She's never here. It's so cold, Elena. Why is it so cold? I made a mistake. $1 million mistake. I miss the way you smelled like eucalyptus and hospital soap. I miss being a man you respected. Please. Pick up. The recording ended with a wet, ragged sob. I deleted it. Mercy was a luxury I had traded for survival. A heavy pounding at the door interrupted the silence. I didn't have to check the camera to know who it was. I opened the door to find Arthur Montgomery,
his face purple with rage, shaking a fistful of legal documents at me. "You killed him!" he bellowed, stepping into the foyer. "You stood there and watched him die because of a piece of paper. You're a doctor. You took an oath." "I took an oath to do no harm, Arthur." Prolonging the agony of a man who explicitly asked to die without machines isn't medicine. It's torture, I said, my voice as flat as the horizon. "And let's be honest, you aren't here because you miss your son. You're here because you found out about the estate." Arthur's eyes shifted. The Montgomerys were old money, but old money runs out when you have a son with a taste for scandal and a wife with a taste for Chanel. "The Hamptons house," he hissed. "It belongs to the family. Julian promised it would come back to us." Julian promised a lot of things to a lot of people. But as of yesterday, the probate court has recognized me as the sole owner of all marital assets. The house is already on the market. The proceeds will be going to a foundation for ALS research, under my name, not his. "You heartless bitch. I prefer the term efficient," I replied. "Now get out of my home. If I see you or Lydia near me again, I will release the records of Julian's offshore accounts to the firm's board. I'm sure they'd love to know how much of their client's money he was laundering for your allowance." He backed away, the threat of poverty finally silencing his moral outrage. As I closed the door, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from a number I had blocked, but she had used a burner. "Scarlett. Scarlett, I know you have the necklace. Give it back or I'm going to the press. I'll tell them you murdered him in the ER. I'll ruin you." I felt a surge of genuine amusement. I typed back a single sentence. "Elena, I'm a surgeon, Scarlett. I know exactly where to cut to make someone disappear from society. I have the footage of you trying to pawn that necklace while Julian was in respiratory distress. Shall we see which story the New York Post likes better?" The silence that followed was absolute. Scarlett Reed was a predator, but she was a small-time one. She had brought a knife to a drone strike. I walked to the window. The city lights twinkled, indifferent to the lives beginning and ending in the concrete canyons below. For 8 years, I had been the shadow behind Julian Vance's light. I had been the support beam, the silent partner, the good wife. That woman was buried in the same plot as Julian. The 60 days were almost up. The divorce was a formality now, a final stamp on a closed book. But as I looked at my reflection in the dark glass, I realized the anger hadn't vanished. It had simply transformed into something more useful. Ambition. I had a flight to Boston in the morning. A new hospital, a new life, and most importantly, a name that belonged to no one but me. The New York County Courthouse was a cold, imposing fortress of stone and bureaucracy, the place where dreams went to be legally dismantled. I walked up the steps, my black trench coat snapping in the freezing wind, feeling a strange sense of calm. Today wasn't just a legal formality. It was the final extraction of a tumor that had lived in my life for 8 years. I sat in the hallway, waiting for the clerk to call my name. The silence was broken by the sound of heavy, uneven footsteps. I didn't need to look up to know it was Lydia Montgomery. She sat 2 chairs away, looking like a ghost of her former self. The designer scarves and the arrogant tilt of her chin were gone, replaced by a hollow, defeated exhaustion. "He called for you at the end, Elena," she whispered, her voice trembling. "In those final hours at Bellevue, when he couldn't even form words anymore, he kept moaning your name.
not hers. Yours. I kept my eyes on the courthouse clock.
I felt no pity, only a distant observation. Regret is a late-stage symptom, Lydia. It doesn't change the diagnosis or the outcome. You're so heartless, she wept. He was your husband. Doesn't any part of you feel the loss? I felt everything for 8 years, I said, finally turning to look at her. I felt the exhaustion of carrying his ego while I was saving lives. I felt the sting of every lie he told. My heart didn't turn to stone. It just stopped being an open wound for you people to salt. The Hamptons' house is sold, Lydia. The trust is gone. I've pledged every cent of Julian's life insurance to the hospital. I won't let his blood money fund your country club life while he rots in a grave he dug himself. The clerk will see you now, a voice called out. I stood up, leaving Lydia crying on the bench, a shrinking figure in a vast gray hallway. Inside the office, the clerk pushed a final stack of papers toward me. Final decree of divorce and the closing of the probate file, the clerk said. Sign here, Dr. Vance. I picked up the pen. For 60 days, I had waited for this moment. I thought my hand might shake, but it was as steady as it was during a delicate heart transplant. I signed my name for the last time as a married woman, Elena Vance. Bold, sharp, final. You're free, doctor, the clerk said, stamping the file with a heavy thud. I walked out of the courthouse, but I wasn't alone yet. Scarlett Reed was waiting at the bottom of the steps. She looked haggard, her cheap coat shivering in the wind. She stepped into my path, her eyes wild with greed. I spent a year of my life on him, she hissed. I put up with his tremors and his moods. I deserve a payout. I didn't say a word. I reached into my bag and pulled out the $120,000 yellow diamond necklace. Her eyes lit up. I let it dangle for a second before dropping it directly into a deep, muddy puddle by the curb. There's your payout, Scarlett. It's right where your reputation is, in the gutter. I didn't wait to watch her scramble into the mud. I signaled for a taxi and stepped inside. As we drove away, I looked back at the Manhattan skyline. The city of my betrayal was fading. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was free. The air in Boston was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of salt from the harbor and the promise of a fresh start. It had been 6 months since I crossed the state line, leaving the wreckage of my old life in the rearview mirror of my Porsche. In New York, I was the wronged wife, or the ice queen surgeon. Here, at Massachusetts General Hospital, I was simply the chief of cardiothoracic surgery. I stood on the balcony of my Beacon Hill brownstone, watching the sunset dip below the Charles River. Unlike the bloody New York sunsets that once signaled my fury, this light was golden and calm. My phone buzzed on the railing, a news alert from a New York legal journal. The fall of the Montgomery dynasty. Arthur Montgomery files for bankruptcy amidst fraud allegations. I scrolled through the report with a clinical detachment. Without Julian's income, and with the IRS breathing down their necks thanks to the offshore accounts I'd flagged, the Montgomerys had crumbled. They had tried to sue Julian's old firm for a payout, but the partners had buried them in countersuits for Julian's malpractice and embezzlement. As for Scarlett, she had been arrested in Atlantic City for credit card fraud. The yellow diamond necklace she'd clawed out of the mud had been seized to pay her state-appointed lawyer. I felt no surge of joy, only the quiet satisfaction of a settled ledger. The clean break Julian wanted had finally arrived, but it was I who had walked away whole. Dr. Vance, the board is ready for you, my assistant, Sarah, called from the living room. I walked inside and adjusted my white coat. Underneath, I wore a tailored navy silk dress, the color of authority.
I caught my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were no longer clouded by the shadows of betrayal. They were clear, focused, and formidable. I had used every cent of Julian's estate, the $1, $2 million, the Hampton sale, and the life insurance, to fund the new neuro-intensive care wing at the hospital. If Julian's life had been defined by a series of selfish betrayals, his legacy would at least be one of healing. I walked into the hospital's main atrium to a sea of applause. Doctors, donors, and the press stood as I approached the podium. Beside me was a plaque veiled in velvet. When we face a terminal diagnosis, whether of the body or the spirit, we have two choices. I spoke, my voice resonating with power. We can let the decay consume us, or we can cut away the rot and build something better. This center is not a monument to a man. It is a monument to resilience. It is a reminder that no one can take your future unless you hand them the keys. I pulled the cord. The veil fell to reveal the Elena Vance Research Center. The applause was deafening, but I was already looking past the crowd. My phone buzzed. A consultation request for a complex heart transplant. I stepped down from the podium, my heels clicking with a steady, confident rhythm. I was no longer the woman who saved Julian's reputation while he broke her heart. I was Elena Vance. I was free, and I was just getting started. Your worth isn't defined by how someone treated you, but by how you stand back up. Build your own strength, stay independent, and remember, the best revenge is living a life so successful that their betrayal becomes irrelevant. Thanks for watching. If Elena's journey inspired you, please hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next gripping story.